Bryon Kroger.
Hey everyone, it's Bryon, and today I'm going to dive a little deeper into the model I introduced in my last video, Scale Leadership, Not Technology. Be sure to check that out if you haven't already. The link is in the description. If you like these videos, please subscribe to my channel, give them a like, and be sure to leave comments. I love turning content into a conversation. Now I want to talk about the topic of this video for just a second. The model I introduced is a way to build capacity for continuous delivery of valuable software to the warfighter. It's also an important mechanism to build up the DoD's digital leaders of tomorrow. Now, I've begrudgingly called it a software factory since that name has already taken off, but it's somewhat comical that the counterculture to the prevailing Taylorist management that I led ended up with the moniker factory, but I guess sometimes you just have to own it. So what is important though is that the name of the game here is to build up continuous delivery capacity. Unfortunately, a lot of people want to focus on this. How many shiny widgets do I have? Especially if we can attach some AI, some machine learning, and even some blockchain. Gotta have blockchain. But really, it's not about the apps. As I said on main stage at Spring One with Lauren Knausenberger last year, continuous delivery is a strategic imperative for the DoD. It won't be the software we go to conflict that wins. It will be the software that we continuously deliver in response to the adversary. You need a good software baseline to be sure, but the real competitive advantage is your ability to sense the change in the field and respond with the continuous delivery of valuable, secure software with high quality and reduced risk. Now that requires capacity in the form of highly trained people. The reason I'm so opinionated about them ultimately being government personnel, or at least working towards that, is because my earlier observations stated a different way is this. It won't be the software you take to a conflict that wins. It's going to be the developers you take to the conflict that win. They ought to be airmen, soldiers, sailors, and Marines, or at the very least government civilians. At Rise 8, we want to help the government build the kind of government capacity that you see here, over and over again, continuously evolving and improving on the model in a viral sort of way. But as I alluded to in my other video, this is only one component of what it takes. A software factory also consists of platform and acquisitions. Parts 2 and 3 will focus on process and technology, but today we're just going to talk about the people and how to resource them. Now, if it seems crazy to build a 340-person software lab in 2 years, I led exactly that at Kessel Run, and it was in a much more hostile environment than is present today, and without all of the lessons learned that I have. And that's why I believe that it can be done better, faster, and cheaper the second time around, and the third, and the fourth, and so on. Now, there are a number of assumptions baked into this proposal, and everything should be assumed to be condition-based. This is meant to be a useful starting point. And first up is acquisitions. So often, Kessel Run is erroneously associated with things like waivers, special authorities, or even no rules. Now, the one special authority that we did have was our Pathfinder designation, but that actually came with an increased frequency and level of oversight at the SAF-AQ level. There are a few key distinguishers that allowed the effort to begin, though. Existing funding, an established requirement, and that SAF-AQ Pathfinder designation, which really just allowed a bypass of the initial planning typically required, things like MDDs, ASP, but ultimately, as I said, it required reporting straight to SAF-AQ on a monthly basis. We also utilized an other transaction authority to get started. I'll talk about that in just a second. But despite the above, the proposed model that I'm putting forward can leverage current authorities and does not require designation of Pathfinder status by SAF-AQ. Now, Kessel Run effort is often described as just a partnership with Pivotal or just an other transaction authority. But it is so much more than that. 12 contracts were awarded in the first year alone. And yes, that included a prototype OT and the Air Force's first production OT, which was awarded outside of DIUX and Army Contracting Command. But it also included 10 traditional FAR-based contracts. The second year was equally as busy. You can see, though, that we had a bit of lag time at one point, and if I could do it all over again, I'd start with these 3 contracts, make it really simple. Now, the government isn't ready to do this alone. It needs enablement. I've come to believe that requires sitting down together with an enabler, side by side, working on real software to solve a real problem for a real user, and then delivering that solution to a real production environment, hopefully over and over again before the enablement ends. Now at Kessel Run, we used Pivotal Labs for this, and I would absolutely recommend them to anybody who wants to do this. Now, if you think enablement services like Pivotal Labs and others are expensive, just remember that good development costs a lot, bad development costs even more. And more importantly, value is not just about cost. Value equals performance divided by cost divided by schedule. And when your performance is near zero, which it is for many software development efforts across the services, it won't matter how much you decrease the cost and schedule denominators. Focus on performance and speed. I have yet to find a better value proposition than what we found with Pivotal Labs at Kessel Run, despite the high cost. Now, second, you need cloud infrastructure and you need a platform. You just do. It's not a debate at this point. Please just do it. Both are below the value line, at least with where we're at in our journey. So do build what make sure you don't build what you can buy and don't buy what you can rent. Remember that vendor lock is different from migration cost here. So vendor lock is when the work you have done is lost when you switch vendors, and it's usually associated with some sort of IP that becomes intimately entwined with your data. Now that is very different from having to do work to migrate, specifically work that you previously forewent by buying or renting a portion of the tech stack. Still though, if the cost of the work required to migrate is too high, you can still end up effectively locked in. I just want to note that actually happens a lot with GOTS. I even believe anecdotally that it happens more often with GOTS than COTS in the current situation, just to be completely honest. But regardless, whether you're working with GOTS or COTS, you should still pay attention to it. Now, I'll just say at the outset, I'm not particularly concerned with the effective migration lock with the major players in this platform space or the open source offerings. Just pick the right tool for the job, ignore the people shouting about lock-in. They'll be the first ones to end up locked into their homeworld solutions. It's just a fact. But you should test this out. At Kessel Run, we did do migration tests to see how hard it would be to migrate some of our longer standing applications like the Tanker Planner tool from a Pivotal Cloud Foundry to a Red Hat OpenShift. And we found that we could do that with relative ease. So migration costs pretty low in this case. I assume that it will work well in the other direction as well as to and from open source offerings. But definitely, if you're concerned about this, you think you might have to migrate in the future, just keep track of it. And if it becomes an issue, then start taking action. But so far, I haven't seen any reason to be concerned about this. Third, procuring all the tools for a DevSecOps toolchain and a modern IT offering is a nightmare using the traditional approach. Create separate T&M contracts to manage both at the direction of the government. It's a perfect model. And then at about the 3-month mark in my model, you'll be wanting to kick off your first round of services contracts to provide supplemental staff for app and platform teams. Then at about the 4-month mark, you need a place for the first teams to land. This is assuming that you did offsite enablement, which, by the way, I highly recommend. Doing it offsite gives you the time to worry about the things that matter around product and making sure you're resourcing the teams instead of worrying about things like facilities, which are difficult to manage, to be honest. I've also really come to appreciate the benefits of having the guest mentality kick in when you do offsite enablement. It's an incredibly effective way to assist in the culture change. Finally, UX is a hard role to fill in the government with government personnel, so be prepared to let out UX services contracts if and when needed. Now, taking a step back and looking at acquisitions a bit more holistically, I have to say that the most important lesson is that the acquisitions team is an extension of the software development and their practices. So they need to adopt a similar mentality of establishing assumptions, creating hypotheses that have short feedback loops. I like this quote where everything in software changes: requirements, design, business, technology, team, and team members. The problem isn't change, because change is going to happen. We have to accept that change is going to happen. We have to optimize for being wrong, right? And so instead, we just need to focus on our ability to cope with change. And that applies equally to acquisitions as it does to product. So I recommend taking an agile mindset towards all of the things. Even crazy, to think that you can be agile when it comes to JSIDs, to PPBE, and to DAS. Some people, they want to throw these out. We just need to get rid of these. These are awful. They're for an industrial era. I think the intent behind all of these things, when you really boil it down, you're talking about requirements, budgeting, and execution. And those are things you're going to have to do no matter what. And when you look at some of the policies and regulations, especially some of the new things coming out, you have most of the tools you need to do the job. Mostly we have cultural barriers. So I'll talk more about those things in another video, but consider using things like value stream mapping and impact mapping as a much more effective way to produce alignment to the higher level requirements coming out of JSIDs, while still allowing product teams the autonomy they need to effectively solve the warfighters' problems, right? Don't create a software spec that's detailed with thousands of lines in a spreadsheet. PPBE in this model becomes a bit more streamlined matter of estimating dev capacity and platform needs and then budgeting for them. And these types of services then are perfect for acquisitions tools like simplified acquisitions, OTAs, and in general the use of modular contracting, which is actually encouraged by the FAR. Bringing it back around to the requirement, then there's a lot that's been pioneered already with efforts like Kessel Run in baking in developmental testing, operational testing, and cybersecurity up front, and then automating fielding on the back end so that we can quickly verify the quality and efficacy of what was built and then get it into the hands of warfighters, right? One thing that we don't pay enough attention to is the cost of delay. Delay presents operational risk. And so as we're thinking about risk, we also need to include delay and make sure that we are focusing on speed without making trade-offs in quality and security. And what we found is that in a modern software development paradigm, speed actually often enables security and enables quality when done correctly. Now, Kessel Run and other organizations deploying onto its platform, like Section 31, for instance, have gone from idea to fielded product in less than 2 months without sacrificing quality, security, or sustainability. Now, the thing here is, though, the most challenging part of all of this is actually just getting started. I mentioned, though, that you don't need to be a Pathfinder to get started quickly. The Federal Acquisitions Regulation, the FMR, the DoD 5000 series, and all of the new policies coming out in the various NDAAs, they provide the tools, tailoring, and flexibility to be able to get moving quickly. NDAA Section 804 is a great option if you already have funding for something new, or if you can fence off a portion of your budget for modernization. It allows you to start executing the mod without JSID's approval and develop an approved requirement after prototype initiation, which is the best time to do it since you'll have real learnings from production to refine what the requirement should be. It's advocated by all of the SAEs, and it gives you the opportunity to shape future policy, regs, and laws. It's pretty awesome. Now, if you don't have funding, NDAA Section 806 might be right for you. Same as Section 804, except this time it requires SCA approval, and you get up to $10 million in funding. Now, if you want to increase that to $50 million ceiling, you can do that with Secretary and Congress notification. There's a million other things I'd like to cover, but I want to keep this short. So here's a quick down and dirty of other things you should be thinking about. Financial strategy, look, once your code goes to prod, only spend $3,400 on it. I'll talk about this in another video. People will fight you on this. The FMR kind of forces people to default to $3,600. But once you are in prod, you are in operations. Your software is operational and you're not undergoing major test events. We're doing incremental testing all along the way. And so there's nothing that's really driving a switch to $3,600 other than culture. Now, contract strategy, lots of things here. Look, go fast, use simplified acquisitions to the maximum extent. Go small and diverse, use modular contracting, the FAR even says to. Incentivize, right? Use small periods of performance to make the contractor earn each pop. And then find rare talent, right? Leverage small non-traditionals. There's a lot of them. I recommend taking a look at the Digital Services Coalition. They are awesome. There's a lot of vendors in that pool that I would highly recommend and have recommended to others. Flexibility, finally, all of this is, I'm proposing a model where all the activity is government-led. So in that case, use services-based contracts. They'll give you tons and tons of flexibility. Now, who's going to do all of this for you? a lean acquisitions team of about 16 personnel. And that might seem crazy, but we actually did it with a smaller team at Kessel Run, at least originally. Now, all of these things are the usual suspects here, except for two. I recommend fighting hard for dedicated legal if you're going to do modular contracting. When you start pumping out as many contracts as the rest of the base combined, you will need it. And then be sure to get yourself a technical writer. You don't want to pull people off engineering to write docs for you. With the teams perfectly resourced, thanks to the acquisitions team, the next step is owning the path to production, aka the path to your user. This is going to rest on the platform. I mentioned already that most of what constitutes the platform layer in the stack is below the value line, so buy a good one and then focus on building an incredible operations team. You will still need some unique services, so be ready to add platform developers into the mix. And if you decided to use a non-standard IT setup, you'll need people to develop and operate it. But most importantly, and what I want to talk about here, is in the DoD context, owning the path to prod, at least with how continuous authority to operate has been implemented thus far, you're going to need a centrally managed compliance pipeline for security and release. And you need engineers who specialize this area as it becomes a dependency for all of the app teams. This dependency is a beneficial trade-off when executed well, given how much time it saves the app team as compared to the traditional compliance process, but it still is a dependency and it needs to be managed by people who are really good at this particular skill set. Now, I'm not going to talk in depth about the personnel breakdown, but you can pause, dig deeper into this if you want. Consider using an enablement model here, just like with labs, especially if you go with a platform like Pivotal Cloud Foundry or OpenShift. The talent that you're going to hire for this is going to come in at a higher rate than you're used to. Get used to it. DevOps engineers have a huge ROI. They're worth the higher investment. Just pay up. Now, you have everything you need to go fast forever with software development, including things, by the way, like AI and machine learning as you start to build more robust, clean, accessible data sets. But importantly, you have now built the digital leaders of tomorrow for your service. You have a software leader, the digital answer to a material leader. You have portfolio leads who will go on to become the next software leaders as more factories emerge, or perhaps you use them to seed the next one. You also start to develop some of the best practitioners in various disciplines that can upskill the rest of the workforce. And finally, you have a ton of development capacity. And again, that's the name of the game. That's the strategic imperative that the services need to be paying attention to. As I said in my last video, make sure to add roles and alignment mechanisms just in time, allowing them to evolve with the architecture based on the problem you're trying to solve. Don't start with a bunch of enterprise architects and portfolio leaders before you even have an app in prod. As leaders emerge, backfill them, use fractal patterns here as the organization scales, doing it just in time to support product team needs, not imposing arbitrary organization frameworks on top of them. Again, this model is really condition-based, and this perfect state is full of assumptions, but it is a good starting point. If you want to scale fast, use mitosis, pairing, splitting, and reconstituting. The change can go viral that way with exponential growth if it's executed correctly. And again, app development is only one of 3 parts necessary for success in government digital transformation. You also need platform and agile acquisitions, and the software leader needs to be well-versed in all 3. That is how you build the software leaders who can build you software delivery capacity. In summary, it's not about how many apps you build, it's about how many people you build. People that can put apps in production continuously with high quality and low risk. That's not just app developers, you're also going to need really great platform engineers who can automate the path to production. Both are going to need to be resourced properly, and that requires really great acquirers. Those acquirers don't need waivers, they just need pre-authorized autonomy. Not delegation, pre-authorized autonomy. And with that, yes, they can Agile all the things, but it takes a good strategy. And all of this is to say, it all boils down to what I'm always saying. Focus on the people. The process and the technology will follow. And as a quick sneak peek, as we delve into process in the next set of videos, we'll talk about how it relates to a tailored acquisitions model that utilizes cool things like VC-style growth boards and metered funding to improve transparency and accountability in a way that ultimately reduces risk. And I'm talking about an unprecedented level of transparency for all stakeholders involved. More transparency, more accountability, not less. we can reduce risk and go fast. So stay tuned. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and leave a comment so we can have a conversation. Thanks. See you next time.